Even if Reggie built you a boat, he still wanted to beat you with his.
When Reggie developed it, everybody in the industry laughed at it. Well, now they're chasing it.
We wanted to build the fastest, safest, best handling boats in the world.
In the world of super-fast, high-performance boats, many entrepreneurs have left their mark on advancing the technology of this original extreme sport. But only a handful have brought forth innovations that continue to set the standards that others now follow. Men like Carl Kiekaper and his revolutionary Mercury outboard engine, Hall of Fame racer and tunnel boat designer Bill Seabold, world record holder for the most victories in the history of the sport, and Don Aronow, pioneer of the Deep V hull, a design that not only revolutionized offshore powerboat performance, but created a lifestyle of fast boats and fast living, personified in the 1980s television drama Miami Vice. But only one man built a billion-dollar global empire with a boat design that would set more speed records and win more world championships than any other.
The motor will be right on top of the limiters, and you want to go fastest, you run a 31 or a 32.
Reggie Fountain and his namesake V-hulls have set the standard for offshore performance boats with a legacy of speed unmatched to this day. Reginald Morton Fountain Jr. was born in 1940 in Tarboro, North Carolina. He grew up in a loving, close-knit family in a neighborhood less than a mile from the Tar River. It was here that the young Reggie Fountain would watch the local anglers launch their small craft power upstream for a day of fishing. Reggie was fascinated by the thoughts of what adventures awaited upriver. And when the opportunity came to join a friend water skiing, Reggie didn't hesitate.
My friend didn't enjoy running the boat all that much, so sometimes his father let me run the boat. Now, I enjoyed water skiing a lot and did a lot of it, but I enjoyed more than anything running that boat up and down the river as fast as it would go.
Reggie soon discovered that he had a natural ability at water skiing. He was enthralled by the sense of speed and transfixed with curiosity on the physics between the water and the ski.
I found out how little changes to your feet or to a ski would make a big difference in the pull or the hydrodynamic drag on your body.
At 12 years old, with money saved from a variety of summer jobs, Reggie purchased his first boat, a 14-foot Speedliner with an 18-horsepower outboard engine.
Speedliner was a fast boat, and the Mercury Super 10 Hurricane was a really fast engine. I put them together and then started working on those, trying to make them better.
Reggie began to challenge the local anglers, chasing their boats up and down the river. And it wasn't long until the local folks of Tarboro began talking about the antics of the wild kid on the river.
And it became a challenge to be the fastest of all the boats down there. Of course, my competition wasn't the highest level in the world, but at the level I was at, it was a benchmark to set.
At age 14, he was approached by a local tobacco farmer who had recently purchased an auctioned race boat.
There was a guy named Waldo Pittman, and he was straight off the farm. And he needed a young person to race his boat, and Reggie was it.
I was pretty much, by popular opinion, the person that he thought he should put in there. I was light, had a lot of experience, and at least I was the fastest guy on the Tar River.
After a few short practice sessions, and with permission reluctantly granted by his father, Reggie prepared to enter his first boat race.
My mother had prepared a ham for the holidays, and it was in a refrigerator out in the garage. And I went out there, and next thing I know, Reggie had a little small racing boat about, I don't know, they were 10 or 12 feet. And he had it turned upside down. He had Mother's ham out and got the hock part out where the best grease was and greased up the bottom. And so it would run fast. And I'm sitting there saying, man, I don't think you ought to be doing that. I'm not saying it, but I'm thinking it. And it didn't bother Reggie at all. He kept on keeping on. He had a race to win.
I remember on the very first lap, there was one boat, about one boat length in front of me, and on the outside. He turned in front of me. I didn't know any better, so I just ran right over him thinking that that's what you're supposed to do when somebody gets in your way.
Reggie's competitive spirit continued through high school, where he played on the varsity football, baseball, and basketball teams, while learning a valuable credo that would stay with him through the years to come.
Somebody that made a big impression on me was my football coach, Doug Alexander. He reminded me of a Vince Lombardi type guy. No amount of pain, suffering, self-sacrifice, or dedication is too great a price to pay for the ultimate victory, because to the victor goes all the spoils and all the glory, and to the loser goes only the right to rededicate himself to becoming a winner. And I'll always remember those lessons taught to me by my football coach and my parents, who felt the same way about life and being a success.
Upon graduation from high school, Reggie began his undergraduate studies at the University of North Carolina Business School. He worked throughout college, delivering the school's newspaper and other part-time jobs to help his parents in underwriting his education and to have the money required to pursue his competitive passions.
I was a member of the University of North Carolina trap shooting team. We competed each year with North Carolina State, Duke, and Wake Forest. And for 5 years in a row, I was fortunate enough to win that championship. In the summertime, we go down to Washington, North Carolina, and water ski on the Pamlico River. If someone would come up in a boat that they thought was fast, we challenge them, because I still wanted to be the fastest guy on the river.
By his senior year in college, Reggie's propensity for fast cars and fast boats was beginning to demand a bigger budget. And with law school on the horizon, the young competitor needed to increase his income in a way that would also allow him adequate time for his studies. That opportunity came when he was approached by an associate of his father's to try his hand at selling insurance.
When you're trying to race, whether it's cars or boats, it always takes money. And not only did I deliver the Daily Tar Heel, but I started selling insurance for the Northwestern Mutual. In a year or two after I got out of law school and passed the bar, I hit the $1 Million Round Table by 1969, and for every year thereafter until 1979, where I went full-time into the boating business.
Reggie's business acumen had begun providing a good income while still allowing him the freedom to pursue his racing passion. And he was ready for the next step.
I wanted to get a little more seriously into the racing, so I bought a race boat, a Glastron Molinary from the Glastron Boat Company. And I did quite well as an amateur, but when I'd go to the races where the Mercury factory team was and the Johnson and Evinrude teams were, I knew I needed to go even faster yet.
Reggie knew exactly what direction he wanted to go, head-to-head with the professional drivers of the factory teams. Men like Bill Siebold, Bob Herring, and Italian race champion and boat builder Renato Molinari, each a legendary driver on Mercury's Black Angels race team.
The Mercury factory racing team was probably the Chicago Bulls, if you will, the New York Yankees of boat racing at that time. And this was big-time boat racing, and there was a very high-stakes game going on then between Mercury and Johnson and Evinrude.
At the end of the season, Reggie would tow his boat to Mercury's racing headquarters in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. He was there to see race team manager Gary Garbrick.
Gary Garbrick was the director of the whole thing, and Gary was the classic race director in that he had a tremendous amount of knowledge about the hulls, about the engines, about the propellers, about the setup, but he also understood the human side of it and how to work those drivers in concert.
Garbrick, he didn't have much time for me, so he put me with one of his aides, Jim Merton. And Merton took a look at my boat and says, "We're going to give you a pair of our inline six stackers." Well, he put those on and he says, "I'll just take your motors back and give you these, and here's how much money it's going to cost you." And they charged me a pretty good chunk of money for selling me their old used factory racing stuff, but it worked. It was like adding 3 motors on the back of the boat instead of 2. That thing was fast.
Fountain came out strong the following season and immediately began to prove his mettle on the regional circuits, challenging the larger and better financed teams while often running up front against factory team drivers like Bill Siebold.
I remember meeting Reggie in Lake Livingston, Texas. I was running a single Molinari, and Reggie was still running the Glastron with twins. He was a pretty tough competitor. He wasn't an easy guy, that's for sure.
It was a period of growing competition among marine manufacturers, with boat and engine companies spending millions of dollars to develop and refine their products on the race course. Victory was all about bragging rights and the corporate mantra that to win on Sunday meant sales on Monday. And the intense kid from Tarboro, North Carolina was beginning to get noticed by several of the corporate teams.
My first factory-sponsored race boat, paid for entirely by the factory, was by Glastron Boat Company, the biggest boat company going at that time.
I get a phone call one morning. Hi, this is Reggie Fountain. I'm from Tarboro, North Carolina, and I'm the best boat driver in the world. I want to race one of your Molinaris. And I thought to myself, you know, I always get the crank calls the earliest in the morning. But instead of hanging up on him, I turned him over to Bob Hammond, who was the president of Glastron. And next week, Reggie shows up in Austin, Texas, and we take him out to Lake Travis and put him in our factory twin-engine Molinari. Reggie turned some of the fastest times we had ever seen in a Molinari.
It was pretty fast and it was light, but in running it, I said, you know, as fast as your boat is, I think those old motors from Mercury were faster than these new Twister 2Xs that you got. And they said, oh no, Mercury wouldn't send us anything but the best motors. I said, well, okay, I'll go take the boat and go to a few races.
Back in North Carolina, Reggie, unbeknownst to his new sponsor, would swap the engines on his new boat with the older model Stacker outboards he had previously raced. And after a few practice laps on the Pamlico River, his earlier hunch proved correct. The factory boat, now running the older outboards, tested over 5 miles per hour faster than the engines that Glastron had provided. He would debut the boat in 1972 at a factory race in Texas, and Reggie would arrive with an unexpected surprise for his new sponsor, Ernie Schmidt, Glastron's director of marketing.
And I had my stackers on there. He said, what in the world are you doing with those old motors? Where are our motors? I said, your motors are sitting at home in my garage because these are faster. And it was too late to do anything about it. He just shook his head and walked off. And I ran every factory boat out there, Johnson's, Evinrude's, Mercury's, and all with those engines.
We thought, who is this guy? I mean, we knew more about boats than anybody in the world, we thought. And Reggie probably knew more about engines than we did.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Reggie would campaign the Glastron boat rigged with his personal engines for the remainder of the season, and soon caught the attention of Mercury team leader Gary Garbrecht.
Mercury would see talent out in the field, and they would say, you know, if this guy had a little better engine or a little better propellers or a better boat, and they would go out and pass out this equipment and let the people kind of support themselves and take it to the races.
Garbrecht directed Merton to give Reggie a new set of Twister outboards that had been specifically tuned by the factory. And this time around, it would be an outright trade for his old motors.
I effectively was now racing for both Glastron, who owned the boat, and for Mercury, who really was providing the motors.
Competition among the major outboard manufacturers was at its height. Mercury and its chief competitor, Outboard Marine Corporation, parent company of the Johnson and Evinrude brands, were locked in an ever-increasing cost spiral. And it was starting to affect their bottom lines.
Boat racing was kind of run what you brung. Triple engine boats, quad engine boats. To make it more affordable, the manufacturers got together and decided, well, let's just create a one class with a single engine boat.
While running strong in the new single engine class, the earlier agreement between the brands would now give Mercury pause when OMC announced its upcoming debut of an experimental rotary engine capable of producing 240 horsepower, a substantial increase that would certainly give both Johnson and Evinrude a clear advantage.
They had made an agreement with Wankel and developed a rotary outboard motor. Very fast, a very lightweight motor, but Mercury didn't have anything at the moment to compete with it.
We raced against them a few times, and they were extremely strong, and we couldn't run with them.
This was a serious threat to Mercury's competitive edge, and the team reached out to Fountain with a counter strategy in mind.
Garbrick finally started talking to me and said, I'm going to give you a new single engine boat to start practicing with so you can become efficient with that. But meanwhile, I want you to keep showing up with that twin and our Mercury engines and keep us out front.
They kept this twin engine boat of Reggie's around to go out there and make sure that Mercury still won that race.
Reggie Fountain was now an unofficial, or rather, undercover, Mercury team driver. Garbrick's strategy was working, and the competition took notice.
Reggie and I started competing at races around the southeast United States, and he would come with two boats to the race, single engine and a twin. Usually I could run with him pretty good with the single engine. He'd put that twin engine out there, and I couldn't compete with that thing. He could go through the corners about as fast as I could go down the straightaways.
The rules that went with the gentleman's agreement at the factory didn't apply to me. And I raced that boat 23 times. I won 22 races. In one race, I was clearly in front and ran out of gas just before the end, but I was so far ahead, I got out and paddled across and ended up in second place.
1974, and the country was feeling the full effects of the Arab oil embargo. The factories began to cut back on their racing programs in order to sustain through this period of limited supplies of high-cost fuel. Fountain would also become an official driver that year for Mercury. Even on a limited racing schedule with reduced factory resources, Reggie ran strong that first season, setting 2 world records and 3 national closed-course championships at Miami's Marine Stadium, all in a single day.
There wasn't anybody could get in a single engine boat and put the boat around the race course any faster than Reggie.
Mercury Marine's factory race team would enjoy worldwide acclaim throughout the 1975 season, winning 13 of 19 races, with Reggie being honored as the outstanding driver of the season. But it would also result in one of the most spectacular crashes in Fountain's career, when at the Miami Marine Stadium, he tangled with 2 other boats on the front straightaway at Cartwheel. The crash destroyed the boat, put Reggie in the hospital, and in the world spotlight.
I was in every paper in the country because some Associated Press photographer had his camera on it and got about 10 or 12 series of shots of the whole blow-over occurring. So I would say probably I got as much, if not more, publicity for that bad news event as I ever got for any of the good news events.
The season would end with Mercury team driver Bill Seabold taking the Formula One World Championship that year in St. Louis, the equivalent of the Daytona 500 for tunnel boat racing. 1976, America celebrates its bicentennial, and Team Mercury is once again poised to dominate the season. Earl Bentz, who had recently started racing as a Mercury-supported independent, would now replace Bob Herring, who would leave the team to pursue business interests in Europe.
Well, there were some sporadic team races in 74 and 75, but really the Mercury team came back together as Reggie and Billy and I in 1976.
Reggie would campaign in a new boat that season, christened the Spirit of 76.
Garbrick came to me and said, you know, you've had a good year this year and won a lot of races for us. So I'm going to give you a boat that's capable of winning the world championship. And he gave me a boat with a really powerful engine.
Taking advantage of the lack of fuel regulations in the series, Garbrick and his crew had modified Reggie's engine to burn methanol. While this would provide additional top-end speed, giving Fountain a distinct advantage over the competition, it would also require precise coordination between driver and crew, as methanol's high combustion temperatures could also destroy engine components in a short amount of time.
So we go to St. Louis, race started, I hit the starter, and first thing I know, I'm at the first corner first and won the first heat. But when the heat was over with, I could feel in that last lap I had some problems with that engine back there.
We could put the whole boat inside the enclosed trailer and work on it.
You could repair engines, but you weren't supposed to change engines. So I went out with a new power head in the second heat, and I went out with a new power head in the third heat, and I won all 3 heats.
Our goal was to win, and it was instilled upon us that if Mercury finished second, we lost.
The season would end in spectacular fashion for the entire Mercury team as they set a world record for the most wins in the history of tunnel boat racing. The following season would begin Team Mercury's exclusive use of Seabolt-designed boats with a proliferation of experimental technologies.
The team at Oshkosh came up with some incredible features, brakes on boats and things that nobody had ever heard of before.
Garbrick had come up with the ideas that we'd put little cylinders on the back of each sponson, and just before I got to the corners, I'd push a little button and it dropped that cylinder down about an inch below the sponson, and it almost threw me through the front of the boat, stopping that boat so fast for the corner.
We just annihilated them because we had 3 team boats with brakes on them, and OMC showed up, and we got first, second, and third in every heat.
Team Mercury would capture 23 victories that season, finishing with a spectacular podium finish for Benz, Seabolt, and Fountain at the World's Championships in St. Louis. The beginning of the 1978 season was rife with rumors that the factory teams would cease their racing programs by the end of the year. What was now becoming almost routine, Mercury was again dominating the series, finding Benz, Seabolt, or Fountain on the podium at each event. Reggie would take the World Championship in St. Louis that year, the second time in 3 seasons.
Coming up now on 1 minute, we have 10 seconds.
By 1979, the rumors of the factories disbanding their race programs were confirmed, and Reggie Fountain would retire from active tunnel boat competition, being part of a legacy of Mercury team victories unmatched to this day.
We did everything we could do to make certain that one of the 3 of us was in the winner's circle every week, and we did that. I mean, we went sometimes years without ever losing a race to our competitor.
There was nobody and no race team in history, I don't care if it's car racing or boat racing or motorcycle racing, that had the dominance that we had in those 4-year period.
I was very fortunate to be a part of the Mercury factory racing team with Bill Seabolt and Earl Benz. Those 2 guys were great teammates, and in my opinion, the best 2 drivers that ever raced a boat.
Coming up now on 20 seconds.
As the era of factory tunnel hull racing was coming to an end, a different style of boat was gaining popularity with high-speed enthusiasts. Sleek V-hulls with powerful V8 engines were building a following in the high-performance lifestyle culture, centered around what initially became known as cigarette-style boats. In Miami, Don Aronow made a name for himself in the design and manufacture of the first boats branded cigarette.
Aronow had a mystique about him, a whole thing that just drew people to him. He was tall, he was good looking, he was macho. He embodied everything about offshore racing that you would think would be involved in the sport.
The boats were fast, well built, and recognized for their ability to perform in rough ocean waters. Gary Garbrecht saw the growing popularity of these deep Vs as an opportunity to not only expand Mercury's development of its inboard engine program, but also as a business opportunity for himself.
Garbrecht came to me and said, I've been providing this guy by the name of Don Aronow all these high-performance engines for his offshore boats for years now, and this guy is making a ton of money. So I think that you and I need to go into the business of building these offshore boats ourselves.
Don was famous at that time with cigarette. He not only built them, he raced them, and he raced them hard, and he won a lot of races. And I think Reggie saw the opportunity to, if he did it right, become a competitor of Don's.
It had all the elements of a winning scenario, where Reggie would design and build the boats, and Garbrecht would supply and test the engines, while allowing Mercury to benefit from the development process. But for Reggie, the challenge would be in what attributes to apply to the new hull. For this, he went back to his earliest experiences with hydrodynamics.
In my late 20s, I met Wayne Willard, a very good and accomplished professional barefoot water skier. I learned a lot about the techniques of water skiing on your feet.
Since we were doing it every day, we would do little things different, and we would see how it would affect the ski. And Reggie, with his knowledge of boats, would relate that to how it would affect the bottom of a boat.
Instead of just building a big boat and trying to cram a lot of horsepower in it to make it go faster, He understood so much more than anybody else did at that time about the hull design, about the way that the engines were rigged in the boat. He knew the boats and he knew speed.
The basic ideas that I was trying to get over into this first boat really came from a 20-foot Allison.
At the time, the Allison craft was probably the most efficient boat, fastest boat. It would run with the right power on it, low 90s without any effort.
The Allison craft had proven to be an almost perfect design for running in the relatively calm waters of inland lakes, and Reggie needed to adapt specific elements of its design to a larger scale.
The main challenge was to take the pad and the keel off the 20-foot Allison, put it on the 30 to 40-foot offshore performance boats, and compete successfully with the cigarettes and well crafts dominating offshore racing and high performance at that time.
I'm at Chris Craft down in Sarasota, Florida, and I get this phone call from Reggie again. Ernie, I want to build boats. I want to build the fastest and the best offshore boats that the world has ever known. How do I do it? Well, I thought about trying to talk Reggie out of it and decided that's going to be fruitless. So I brought him down to Sarasota and introduced him to a friend of mine, Bill Farmer, who was building custom boats there in Sarasota.
I went and purchased me a 31 Excalibur from Bill Farmer and Don Abel at Excalibur Boats.
He came in and had me cut the whole center of our hull of our best mold down the middle to add a pad to it. I thought he was crazy, but he turned out to be right.
The pad ran along the bottom of the boat at a lesser degree than the hull angle. This configuration provided more planing surface, allowing the boat to run higher in the water. The notched angle at the transom provided higher drive height adjustments, known as X dimensions, further reducing drag for higher speed. Reggie also adapted a flared bow to prevent the boat from stuffing into waves and high seas. This design gave the boat a unique look that became known in performance boat circles as the beak.
The whole function of the beak and the way the forward hull was set is as the boat came up and came off of a wave, as it slammed into the next one, the beak held the bow up. It kept the boat running flat and level.
At the time, that was like the horseless carriage, all that'll never sell. It'll be a novelty. Today, every V-bottom that you see that goes fast is a pad bottom boat and a notched transom.
Reggie's relationship with Mercury would continue to grow as he and Garbrecht experimented with the new boat's propulsion systems at the company's secret test facility in Florida, known as Lake X.
He was always putting tremendous demands on our high performance division for more and more horsepower. And as a consequence, he was constantly making our company better because the ideas on what had to be done came from his organization.
We started working on a 454 turbocharged engine. And before it was all said and done, that little boat was running 88 miles an hour on Lake X. It was outrunning the V-bottom offshore race boats when they would come to the lake to get tested.
Reggie knew he now had a boat superior to anything else in its class. All that was needed now was to get the word out.
The first fountain boats were really called Excalibur Executioners. We called in Bob Norskog and Powerboat Magazine to come do a test on the boat.
Bob and I had the privilege of testing Reggie's very first offshore boat, and he takes that attention to detail from the tunnel boat days, so right out of the bat, Reggie had a tremendous advantage over anything we had ever driven in an offshore V-bottom.
Not only was the newly designed Executioner an outstanding success, it received the 1979 Boat of the Year award from Powerboat Magazine.
Over the years, he won in a lot of different categories, but if you had to look at the number of offshore powerboats of the year, Reggie, by far and large, probably had won that award more than all the other competitors combined.
Reggie would see a substantial increase in sales from the publication of the boat's first test review and knew that the time was right to move his manufacturing operation closer to home. And in 1980, Fountain Powerboats moved from the Excalibur facility in Florida to an abandoned tractor dealership in Washington, North Carolina. Shortly thereafter, Gary Garbrecht would leave Mercury and become Reggie's partner in the new firm, Fountain Garbrecht Powerboats. The first boat to come out of the North Carolina factory was a 33-foot deep V, the Fountain Garbrecht Executioner. Reggie branded the boat as the Perfect 10, a reference to its 10-meter length, and a tongue-in-cheek nod to a popular Hollywood movie that season. During production of the Perfect 10, Reggie and Garbrecht also began development of a prototype high-performance catamaran, based on the tunnel hull designs that had served them both so well on the Mercury Outboard racing team. Only this boat was bigger and more powerful than any tunnel racer ever built.
But the real winner, the guy that looks like he's going to take it all, is Executioner, Reggie Fountain.
The boat was 32 foot long and powered by one 600 horsepower Merc cruiser.
The futuristic boat could reach a top speed in excess of 112 miles per hour.
It was the fastest thing out there, but like any tunnel boat, it could be extremely dangerous at high speeds. A good friend of mine, Scott Gillespie, raced with me in that boat several times, and we won every race we went to.
It was an experience that captivated Reggie's friend, a man familiar with operating high-speed craft as a pilot for Pan American Airlines. He now wanted to own the boat.
Scott finally convinced me to sell him that tunnel boat, but with great reservations, because I realized how dangerous that boat was.
Tragically, the inherent danger in that boat would come to pass on Sky's first solo run, when the boat blew over, resulting in the death of Reggie's friend.
It was that very moment that I decided that I would not be building any more catamarans like that for my customers.
While a Fountain Garbrecht catamaran would never go into production, the original Executioner V-bottom continued to grow in popularity, gaining worldwide acclaim in all the major marine publications of the day, a success that would ultimately lead to Gary Garbrecht's departure from the company.
A fellow by the name of Howard Arneson, who was starting the Arneson drives, read all about what we were doing here. Next thing I know, he called up and hired Garbrecht to work for him to help him develop the stern drives, and that left me with Fountain Garbrecht, which later I changed the name to just Fountain after Gary had left.
Throughout the 80s, business flourished under Reggie's hands-on management style and revolutionary hull designs of his boats. And it wasn't long before he realized the need to expand his manufacturing operation. With a small business loan from the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, Reggie purchased 15 acres of land on the banks of the Pamlico River, just down the road from the Fountain shop. Here, he would build the first 10,000 square foot building on the property. Reggie saw the upward growth in sales as being closely related to the superior performance of his boats and his promotional efforts. He was now ready to expand Fountain's marketing campaign to an even larger scale. Racing.
Reggie not only was a boat racer, but he was also a businessman and he was a marketer. He was kind of the P.T. Barnum, if you will, of the boat racing scene.
One of the first boats we built for racing was named Heartbeat. It was a 33-footer that we built for our leading dealer, Art Lilly. He raced that boat all summer, and by the time the summer was over, the magazines were saying he had won more races than anybody else in stock class, and they were proclaiming him to be the one.
By the early 90s, the positive economic climate in the country was making it possible for more people to step up to luxury performance boats. And following the success of the Executioner, Reggie introduced a new 40-foot model. With an enhanced bottom design and streamlined deck count, the new design, christened the Fountain Lightning, immediately captured the attention of the industry.
Bob Norscog, who had been evaluating our boats for many years, called me one day and said, "Hey Reggie, I want to buy one of your 40-footers for racing as the Powerboat magazine special."
Bob Norscog had two different Fountains in his racing career, and ironically, the two that he had were the last two boats that he had built. So after all those years of racing, probably 3 decades of racing, he'd had cigarettes and he'd had scarabs. When he was at the pinnacle of his career, at the twilight of his career, he chose to buy a Fountain.
And he probably won more races in that boat than any other single boat ever in the history of racing. About 3 months before he died, at age 79, he won a race in that 40-foot Fountain.
As orders for the Lightning grew, so did its length, with Fountain introducing a new 42-foot model.
I built a 42-foot racing boat for John Rebin and his son Eric, and had the pleasure of racing with them on many occasions. They won the OPT National and World Championships in 1992 and took the world speed record away from Worldcraft at the same time.
Reggie continued to expand the company's racing efforts as Team Fountain would campaign both a 42 and 47-foot Lightning. The 47 was powered by 3 1,000 horsepower Mercury turbocharged engines.
The boat would run 122 miles an hour, and it was designed to compete with the fastest offshore boats of that time.
In the early 90s, Reggie took the boat to the New Orleans Offshore Grand Prix to challenge the 4-engine catamarans, known as superboats. He would face 2 of the fastest teams on the circuit, each with a celebrity crew. The Popeyes Pepsi Challenge with Al Copeland and Chuck Norris, and Team USA, piloted by Don Johnson and Kurt Russell.
So Reggie goes down to enter the race, brings his boat down, he's ready to go, and they said that'll be a $1,000 entry fee. And Reggie thinks about it a minute, and he said, look, he said, I don't have $1,000 on me, just take it out of my winnings.
So I remember Don Johnson raised his hand and says, hey, wait a minute, who thinks you're gonna outrun all these cats and everything's here?
Al Copeland was standing close by, and Al had already competed against Reggie a couple of times. And he said, look, he said, tell you what, I'll pay Reggie's $1,000 entry fee, and he can take it and pay me back out of his winnings.
Copeland looked at him and said to me, he says, if Reggie says he'll pay me, so we're gonna let him run the race. If he doesn't win the race, Reggie, you're gonna give him the money, aren't you? I said, yes, I am.
If there were any lingering doubts among the competitors of Reggie's ability to win, they were quickly dispelled once the race started.
This is New Orleans now. Keep a close eye on those gauges. We gotta have this one. There it goes. Let's get it. Woo! You see the way we're pulling away from them movie stars? Bye-bye, boys. I love it.
As the Fountain brand became synonymous with high-speed performance, Reggie began to look beyond offshore sport boats for additional markets that would benefit from the Fountain-Mercury relationship.
In the 70s and 80s, all of a sudden, the saltwater markets exploded. People were moving to the shore, more and more people were fishing there.
David Jones came to me and said, we need to increase our presence on the saltwater fishing circuit with our Mercury Outboards. Can you help us?
We had to catch up. We were in last place at that point in time because basically Johnson Evinrude and Yamaha owned that market.
I went and recruited me a group of fishermen, sat down and talked to them.
I knew nothing about how to build a boat, boat building, or the marketing of those, but I did know a lot about what a fisherman was looking for.
Found out that the biggest boat on the circuit was a 25-foot Hydra Sports. Decided that we needed a boat a lot longer than that to go over more water faster, cover more range, and give the fishermen a better chance to go to more fishing holes, regardless how rough the water was and how far away the fish were.
These pros were so knowledgeable of the industry, they knew what we needed to do to improve our engines.
So we decided to build our first 31-foot Fountain center console, longer than anything that was out there by 6 foot.
I'd never seen a boat that ran as well as that. When I got into Reggie's boat and went in for a sea trial in 8 and 10 footers, it was like the difference between driving a Maserati and a Camaro on a track. That's how much better his boat performed and handled.
Next thing I know, we were building a 31-foot center console with twin 200 Mercuries. That was the fastest thing on the offshore fishing circuit.
Normal procedure for any boat that Fountain built was to prove its superiority in the field, and Reggie's first opportunity came when he joined professional angler Clayton Kirby in a king mackerel tournament off the North Carolina coast.
And we fished about an hour and we caught 2 or 3 small fish. And we get a call on the radio from a friend of mine that's up off of Cape Lookout. Well, it's about 45 miles that they're catching some decent kingfish up there. And I said, Reggie, what do you think? You want to let's pick up and run? He's like, well, Reggie wasn't a fisherman. He was a performance guy. He wanted to run. He's like, oh, this is awesome. He said, pull the lines in, let's go. So we picked the lines up. We run 45 miles in about 40 minutes because we're running about 65 miles an hour. We stopped, we put the lines out. We hadn't fished 15 minutes and caught at that time, which was the largest king I'd ever caught in a king mackerel tournament. We put him in the boat. Off to the scales we went. We got in with about 10 minutes to spare and ended up winning first place. I think we won like $6,800. And I said, Reggie, I'm gonna let you have this plaque, and I'm gonna let you have the fish, and I'm gonna keep the check for our efforts. Is that okay? And Reggie said, that's a great deal to me. He's still got that fish mounted at his house, still has that trophy from the first day we ever fished together.
It gave us a great jump start. More fishermen came to me, said, I want boats like that Kirby guy was at that tournament with. So we started building those, and from that point forward, we moved full steam ahead with even bigger and faster boats in the offshore circuit. fishing principally with the Southern Kingfish Association and Jack Holmes.
When the Southern Kingfish Association was founded in 1991, we had an awful lot of boats out there that people were using. Small Makos, Robalos, all in the 19-foot to 25-foot. But here was Reggie with a 31-foot boat that had technology he adopted from the racing world. Clayton Kirby, who worked for Reggie, campaigned one of those boats. So every time Clayton would show up at the tournament, he could run faster, he could run a little farther than the other boats, and all of a sudden everybody started to say, we can't win if we don't have a fountain powerboat.
Following the success of the Fountains fishing teams and the SKA, Reggie's acquisition of the American Striper Association expanded the territory for showcasing his boats to cover the entire east coast of the United States.
The American Striper Association helped us develop our tournament trail from North Carolina up to Maine, and the Southern Kingfish Association went from North Carolina down around Florida and all the way across the Gulf.
As his boats gained dominance on both fishing circuits, other manufacturers began producing larger boats with even more horsepower in an attempt to slow the Fountain juggernaut.
There was a bitter war out there for a long time. We went through probably 10 years. My boat's better than your boat. The manufacturers were working with the magazines to let everybody know why their boat was better.
Competition between the major fish boat brands was now at a fever pitch, with manufacturers all making claims on the top speed of their boats. Always ready to take up a challenge, or, in this case, to create one, Reggie brought his newest boat, a 38-foot Fountain, to the SKA season opener in Key West, Florida. Not just to fish the tournament, but to prove Fountain's superiority in top speed and handling.
The Fountain powerboat was way out in front of everybody. They slowed down, they made a circle, a complete circle around the guy that was running in second place, and then sped off from him. Well, Reggie turned around and had a helicopter there to shoot all of this, showing just how fast it was.
And that, I think, without question, proved to everybody again, as we always try to do, that we had the best performing boat on the water at that time.
Now, literally running circles around the competition, the Fountain center console had for several years been the boat of choice for some of the world's most famous fishermen.
In 1998, I believe it was, I'm sitting in my office one day and my secretary comes in out of breath and says, Reggie, said, President Bush is on the telephone. He wants to speak with you about a boat. And I said, oh yeah, sure. She says, no, I think it's really him. It sounds pretty official. So I said, put him through.
Mr. President, how are you? Good to see you, sir. You're looking good.
It would be the beginning of a close relationship between Reggie and the Bush family, as George Bush Sr. would own and fish 3 Fountain Center consoles over the next 15 years.
I called Mr. Fountain Boys the other day. I said, I'm so excited about getting this boat. He said, well, I had it up to 73 yesterday or something like that. 73, Christ. Up here in Maine, I'll tell you.
And he would provide his friend public testimony on the performance of his personal Fountain powerboat.
I deeply appreciate the fact that my Fountain can outrun anything on the Kennebunkport seacoast. Believe me, we move.
As the popularity of both Fountain sport and fishing boats continued to grow, Reggie introduced several new innovations to the basic V-hull design, changes that would radically increase the performance of the boats and set a standard that other manufacturers would attempt to duplicate.
What we did there was to come out with more lines of boats, but we also came out with the positive lift hull. That was just another name for steps on the boat.
The concept of steps had been around for years, but rarely used. In the proper configuration, a stepped hull allows the stern of the boat to ride higher in the water, providing aeration to the bottom of the boat, lessening drag and increasing the top speed.
Professionally, I raced an older 10-meter Fountain with Jeff Haylett, and we were racing step-bottom Fountains at the time. We weren't winning because it was a much older design. So the following year, Jeff Haylett stepped the bottom with the help of Reggie's engineers, and we gained almost 10 miles an hour. We started winning races.
Reggie continued to experiment with the various design characteristics of his boats, all in the quest to be the fastest boat on the racecourse.
I'll never forget back in the mid-90s at the Tampa St. Pete World Championships when Reggie showed up with the first canopy race boat. And all of us racers looked at that boat and were kind of in awe or shock. What that boat did totally raised the bar for our sport, meaning that we were so outclassed that horsepower couldn't even make up for the difference in speed with that canopy race boat.
This dynamic increase in speed and the improved safety factor in the design propelled other teams to make similar adaptations to their boats, an evolution that ultimately created an entirely new class of race boat and an even stronger market presence for Fountain. By the mid-90s, the Fountain factory had maximized its manufacturing infrastructure, and in the next phase of Reggie's plan, expanded operations with an additional 50,000 square feet of space in what would eventually become a 250,000 square foot manufacturing and testing facility. Fountain would also expand its management team when the former director of product planning for Brunswick Corporation joined the firm.
When Reggie found out that I'd retired, he gave me a call. So I joined Reggie as his executive vice president and chief operating officer.
Reggie had big plans for the growth of his company and the welfare of his workers, and brought in the former chief resident at Duke University Hospital as the company's on-site doctor.
I think Reggie really had a genuine interest in the health of his employees, and I think that Reggie saw this as an opportunity for us to collaborate and keep them healthy, keep him building his boats.
So as you look at the development of Fountain, and Reggie starts out with the performance pleasure V-bottoms, and then he moves into the fishing arena, the natural next step in the progression was to attack the express cruiser market.
It was a segment of the marketplace that we were missing out on, where we could generate large revenues and where we were capable of building with the size factory that we had. So I came up with a 48-foot sports cruiser, and I knew that I could make one that would go faster than anybody else had out there.
The new Fountain Express Cruiser was a revolutionary concept in big boat design. While the 48 offered all the luxury amenities of a traditional cabin cruiser, its unique hull design provided less hydrodynamic drag, making it the fastest cabin cruiser on the market with a fuel efficiency rating higher than any other. And to prove it, Reggie once again set a challenge for his new boat: to establish an open water speed record.
The gentleman who had purchased the boat wanted the boat in Cancun, Mexico. In the discussions it came out, well, why don't we just take the boat across?
So I thought, what better way to show to the rest of the world how superior our Express Cruiser was to anything else they'd ever seen before.
The boat was launched in Key West and would be docked in Cancun 8.5 hours later. This set a world record of covering 405 miles of open water at an average speed of over 46 miles per hour. As the Express Cruiser was making international headlines, Reggie's sport boats were dominating the offshore racing circuits.
It worked out well that we had all of our customers helping us. They came in and bought the boats. We didn't show them how to run the boats. We'd sort of act as a pit crew advisor to help them go faster.
The Fountain brand was on a winning streak that would continue for over a decade, beginning in 2001 and capturing the majority of V-Class championships in both the American and European offshore circuits. It was also during this time where Reggie's sons would come of age in racing, following in the footsteps of their famous father. Reggie Fountain III would enter the game at the age of 16 as the youngest driver in history to compete on the APBA offshore circuit.
Reggie passed us like we were standing still. And it was more fascinating later to find out that his 16-year-old son, Reggie III, was at the helm. That completely blew us away. The talent that transcended generations is incredible.
Reggie Fountain III continues racing to this day with more than 4 national and world championship victories to his credit. Wyatt Fountain would begin his racing career a little later in life, but quickly proved his Fountain lineage in his first season with Fountain team driver Jeff Harris.
But we're basically 2 rookies going to the first turn in Daytona,
I think we got second in that race. We miscounted laps, but we never lost a race the whole year. We did everything. We were Throttleman of the Year, Driver of the Year, APBA Hall of Champions, World Champions, National Champions. We knocked it out of the ballpark. It was amazing. And you know, that to me was kind of taking everything that my dad had taught me.
With Fountain consistently dominating on the offshore race circuits, other manufacturers began to claim top speed records they were setting.
Despite the fact that everywhere we went, we saw our boats passing everybody else's, there would be some people that would claim that their boats could outrun ours.
It would become a rivalry of brands not seen since the outboard wars of the late 60s, as Outer Limits powerboats and Reggie Fountain came together for a showdown on national television.
The boat behind us is the world's fastest V-bottom, period.
We think maybe they went 161 in their dreams.
To travel both boats on the same day across the same course would be fair.
I doubt they can even run 160 mile an hour in a two-way run.
We will always be the world's fastest V-bottom, and we're going to continue to up the mark.
So in the early 2000s, we set up a kilo run here in Washington, North Carolina, sanctioned by the American Powerboat Association, Superboat International, and the Union of International Motorboating, to have all the proper sanctioning bodies here on a certified kilo course, and invited the world to come to see who had the fastest boat.
Reggie already held the current APBA V-bottom kilo record at 153 miles per hour set in 2001, and was the 8th consecutive speed record set by Fountain since 1991. But this time it would be different, as the competition was now running boats with new hull attributes and propulsion configurations originally pioneered by Fountain. The race was scheduled for February, a time that offered cooler air temperatures and a relatively smooth running surface on the Pamlico River. While a general sense of sportsmanship appeared on the surface, the underlying tension was evident, as everyone knew that this event would establish to the world who had the fastest boat.
We're going to get it put on the boat best we can. All right.
With less than 24 hours before the run, the Fountain team would continue to test and make final adjustments to the boat.
We're catching too much water pressure. We're riding up on the water piece back there, I think. This thing's fast, though, I can tell you that. I don't know how fast.
But not fast enough, as the team would work through the night, fine-tuning the engines and reshaping the bottom of the boat.
But anytime you're going that fast, a lot of things can happen. And most of them aren't good if they go wrong at that kind of speed.
Just not a whole lot, because Reggie's going to have the tips and pit.
We were actually just blueprinting the bottom, making sure the bottom was perfectly straight. Where a boat cures, it wants to shrink or twist, and the bottoms aren't always perfect. I'm talking thousands of inches, because a couple of thousandths here and a couple of thousandths there will change the running condition of a boat. And that was the most important part about making that boat, that particular boat, run those speeds.
By morning, it was all systems go, as the Fountain prepared to head out to the course.
Tell Reggie, if you don't hurry up, I'm leaving without it.
Each boat was scheduled to run in the order in which their team signed in. The V Unlimited class would start, and the 42-foot Fountain, with Reggie Fountain on the throttles and Ben Robertson at the wheel, were scheduled to run first. The course is a straight run for 1 kilometer, or 5/8 of a mile, marked by buoys at both ends. Each competitor completes a two-way run, first going with the current and then against it. The final speed is an average of this two-way pass through the kilo trap.
Okay, get ready. 3, 2, 1, start.
John Wishler, your time?
13.59.
Total 171.83.
The boat hit a top speed of over 177 miles per hour on its second pass, giving Fountain a two-way average of just over 171 miles per hour, breaking his old record by more than 18 miles per hour.
The average was about 171 or 2. There's a lot more there. We can probably pick up on that a whole lot just with balance. And then a little more work on the boat for a few weeks, and 180, 85 is easy.
It would be another milestone accomplishment for Reggie Fountain, with his closest competitor nowhere to be found.
I caught up with Mike via cell phone on Friday morning about 8:30, 9 o'clock, and he was already at the airport. He said that he had put the boat in the water at 5:30 down at Wilchards Beach, and in the rain and in the dark, and took it out for a run, and that the engine, he had some engine problems, and decided to cut his losses and take it back to the shop.
None of the people that came here to run that record even bothered to put their boats in the water after we did that run, because I think most of them were 30, 40, 50 miles an hour slower than we were.
Fountain was now the undisputed leader in high-performance V-bottom boats, with sales in excess of $80 million by 2006. The sleek, high-powered boats coming out of the Fountain factory fit virtually any scenario where superior speed and handling were critical, and this translated well into government specialty craft.
We've provided military-style boats to U.S. Coast Guard, Navy SEALs, sheriff's departments, and law enforcement agencies in different parts of the country and in different parts of the world, and take great pride in having the reputation and knowledge to know how to do that.
As Fountain established a new standard of performance for center consoles and special application boats, new manufacturers began to enter the market, many sporting modified facsimiles of various Fountain design features. To reinforce the superiority of his brand, Reggie set out to establish yet another world record. This time with his 38-foot fishing boat in a challenge he termed Breakfast in Hatteras, Lunch in New York.
To drive from Cape Hatteras to New York at the Statue of Liberty usually takes about 9 hours, and you may be getting some tickets along the way. We wanted to prove that we could make this trip from Cape Hatteras to the Statue of Liberty in New York in 6 hours.
The run would be directed from the air by Reggie, and the crew would include team manager Clayton Kirby, crew chief Brian Forehand, and veteran marine journalist Eric Colby. To replicate the scenario that any fisherman might experience, the run would be attempted without having to stop for fuel.
435 miles.
Preparing to launch the following morning, weather was the primary concern.
We don't know what kind of weather we're going to run into along the way. So we've set this boat up with 600 gallons of fuel, which means if we have to run wide open and we get in big seas and have to run the tabs down, we can still safely run 50, 55 miles an hour.
It would be a 410-mile run, beginning with a southeast heading out of the channel, a left turn towards the northeast, and around Cape Hatteras Point for the start of the official clock. Brian Forehand would pilot the boat in tandem with Kirby on the throttles, who would manage the speed and fuel consumption. 5:55 a.m. and it's go time. It was near perfect conditions with 1 to 2 foot seas as the boat maintained an initial average speed of 65 miles per hour. Back at the Fountain headquarters, Reggie and the support team prepared to intercept the crew just offshore of Virginia Beach. The team estimates the intercept at approximately 10:30 a.m. Just as planned, the boat comes into sight. Radio communications from the crew confirmed seas of only 2 feet and a cruising speed of 68 miles per hour. At this pace, the boat was considerably ahead of schedule, and the support team decides to proceed north and transfer to the helicopter in order to intercept the crew when they arrived in New York Harbor. Time now is critical as a cell phone call from Kirby alerts them of their location. Just south of the Sandy Hook Peninsula and running at an incredible speed of 75 miles per hour. With just minutes to go before the boat passes under the Verrazano Bridge, the air support team catches up with the crew. 12:05 p.m. and mission complete as the boat settles down in front of Lady Liberty. And by 1 p.m., the Fountain team would celebrate their success over lunch. Cape Hatteras, North Carolina to New York City in 6 hours, 10 minutes, and 8 seconds.
We did that again just to showcase the range of our boats and the fact that they could do it on one load of gas, which they did.
Boat rallies, known as poker runs, are popular events for high-performance boat enthusiasts. While not officially a race, most people would be hard-pressed to discern the difference once the fleet takes off for the first checkpoint. The concept may be to collect a winning poker hand at different points along the course, but the intent is all about speed. Fountain was one of the first manufacturers to design and build boats specifically to run in these events. He became one of the sport's biggest supporters, sponsoring the efforts of poker run promoters around the country.
Reggie helped me create this next level of poker runs with his massive promotions.
When I grow up, I want to be just like Reggie.
How often you get to ride with Mr. Reggie Fountain, the legend of powerboat?
It will never happen again.
And we just kept on growing from 30 poker run events to over 100 today. And I'd say a lot of that is to do with Mr. Reggie Fountain.
As the popularity of weekend poker runs grew, other high-performance manufacturers began to target the poker run customer. High-performance catamarans are considered faster boats than V-bottoms due to their twin-hull design, allowing them to travel higher in the water, supported by a cushion of air that collects between the sponsons. While this may have been true in relation to the average V-bottom running against a cat, Reggie knew he could change this conventional perception.
From racing with the Mercury Factory racing team, I knew that cats were really the fastest boat on the water if set up perfectly. But I was more prone to want to build V-bottoms for the general public because I knew that cats were very prone to blowing over, as I'd done a number of times. So what I did is I took the V-bottoms and tried to make them as competitive as possible, figuring if I had a V-bottom that would run with the cats even close to it, I'd certainly have a V-bottom that would outrun all other V-bottoms out there.
In 2006, Reggie and the Fountain team would take on the big cats at a national poker run event in Jacksonville, Florida.
That poker run had gotten a whole lot of publicity over the fastest cat there and the fastest V-bottom there, and every year it was a good way to display the kings of speed in every area. So I said, hey, wouldn't it be great if we could go there and beat up on the cats? I had a boat called the Cat Killer that we set up as a full-fledged racing V-bottom, and we took it down there and gave a real fair representation of the V-bottoms against the cats.
Driving the boat would be David Knight, president of Fountain Powerboats, with Ben Robertson on the throttles.
Everybody thinks the cats are the fastest boats. Doesn't seem to be that way out on the race course, so we'll see what it is out here on the poker run course.
Over 170 high-performance boats were in attendance, representing all of the major manufacturers. The order of the day was speed, and the large cats were out in force, strutting their twin-engine craft, pushing upwards of 3,000 horsepower.
We hear about all these fast boats, but wherever we go, we don't usually find them. We just want to see what the cats are doing here. We want to see what the other V-bottoms of our competitors are doing here, so we can go back and know what kind of homework we have to do, if any.
The 47-foot Fountain was itself equipped with twin supercharged engines, maxing out at 1,550 horsepower each. But a delay in getting the boat to the water put the team back in the pack with the slower class boats.
We were like 17th on the start. There wasn't a real good definite start, and one guy took off. He must have been out there a mile ahead of the start.
Behind at the start, the Fountain immediately began to work its way through the field, and within the first mile of the run had the lead boat in its sights. Just before the bridge, the Fountain made its move, passing the twin-engine 3,100 horsepower cat at an impressive speed.
I was up in the air in a helicopter, and one thing we tried to do, when we got so far ahead, I'd slow them down because all the other guys give up. We wanted them to max their stuff out and break it.
I saw them in the rearview mirror, and I knew we had a ways to go, so we pulled back. so he could catch up with us, because we wanted to film us pulling away from him.
It proved to be no contest, even in a drag race style start, as the Fountain quickly out-accelerated the Cat. The Fountain sped so far ahead of the pack that it began passing boats in the opposite direction, still making their way to the first card stop. As the Fountain maintained a top speed in excess of 160 miles per hour, the Cat struggled to keep up. And in less than a mile from the second start, bowed out of the competition.
I think ultimately he broke a motor, so we had our eye on him. I didn't want anything bad to happen to him.
Back at the docks, Reggie wasted no time in debunking the myth of the cats.
I guess we heard enough about 180-mile-an-hour cat, so ever how fast they went, we'll let them pick any speed they want. It was pretty clear we were faster. Now, we'd like to catch them out in the ocean one time with the waves 3, 4, 5, and 6 foot, because the difference would grow dramatically.
We were proving that our boats were the king of all the V-bottoms without any question, and in many occasions were competitive with cats.
The Fountain Cat Killer would prove to have more than 9 lives itself as it transitioned to the offshore racing circuit, capturing 2 national and world titles.
I bought it in 08, I won the Nationals in 09, and in 2010 we ended up going back to the Worlds, and we ended up taking the whole class that year. Well, the cats, they run well and everything, but when it comes to a monohull boat, I mean, nobody built them like Reggie.
Reggie Fountain Jr. set a standard of excellence in high-performance boats that continues to influence the industry to this day, and established a legacy of respect from his customers, employees, competitors, and friends.
Fountain was probably the first big legitimate offshore producer, and wasn't tied into any cartels, wasn't tied into smugglers. They were a legitimate boat company with legitimate dealers and legitimate users.
He did a tremendous amount for the people of this county. He provided jobs for them, he provided insurance, he provided benefits. He was a big asset to the community.
The legacy that he's going to leave is still being written right now. And we won't really know until he's not here anymore. But he's already done more right now than all the rest of them who aren't here anymore, probably combined.
Nobody has done as much in as many different sports as Reggie has. When it comes to being a driver, when it comes to being a team owner, when it comes to being a promoter. If you take all of those different things, and he not only did it in the tunnel boats, but he also did it in offshore racing, and then you throw in his accomplishments with the fishing boats, you put all that together and you blend it all together, a really good case could be made that the single greatest boat racer of all time is Reggie Fountain.
If that was a legacy that I could leave behind me, it would be that I built the very best boats for my customers. And I could not have done that without a lot of very good people backing me up.
With his Carolina fever, lightning striking in his blood, the Spartan Power River left him struggling in the mud. He's the reigning king of offshore. Victory paved his way to the throne. The black angels are rising, and they're hotter than the sun. And the tunnels are raging, and the weak got back and run. He's the reigning king of offshore. Victory paved his way to the throne. Yeah. Victory paved his way to the throne. With his Elvis Presley swagger, challenges that lose control. strong. Yeah, he loves Carolina sugar, called the local ladies king. Well, that's alright now, mama, it's giving them lightning in their dreams.